Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Oh, welcome back to another exciting episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much again for tuning in to this amazing show. Tonight we're coming to you a little different. It's a little bit later this week. We had some technical problems we had to work out. Mr. Hanna has a work schedule that has gone through the roof, which is good. You know,
through the floor, through the walls. It's all over the place.
Yeah. And so it's good for him, right? Because it's more work. It means, you know, their business is doing well. It's something that he can be proud of. But on the opposite side, it means he's not able to attend my house on Tuesdays any longer. So temporarily, what we had to do is we got some equipment. Thank you to all the Patreon providers, and you helped get Hanna a little bit of equipment that he's now able to record in his own house, so that we can do this remotely without having to take that hour-and-a-half drive, given M6 and Michigan's great and amazing and technologically advanced freeway system that they seem to have to repair every 30 days.
Well, when they first put that in, that changed the whole lay of the land around here. But now they're ripping it all apart, and everything's back to the I don't know, tiny farm roads that used to be. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's pretty brutal, but I don't know. If you guys think I sound terrible, give an email or something and say, hey, you sound like crap, and we'll see if we can't figure out a way to make ourselves sound better. But I don't know. I think this thing's it's basically a mini version of what Tanner's got and on his big old super duper rig. So hopefully it sounds good, and hopefully everybody thinks I sound just as terrible as I always do with the background noise and crazy scratchy sounds that Chris likes to edit out usually.
Yeah, that's very true. So anyway, so that's a little bit of a change. We still are probably going to go ahead and try and release every Tuesday. Our goal is still to have an episode out every Tuesday. We have been doing the live episodes, but I don't know if we're going to still continue to do those. So I guess if you have an opinion, send us an email at cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook /Cellar Door Skeptics, and let us know if you would rather hear us live or if you just like to listen to it postpartum or whatever they call it, you know.
Postmortem.
Yeah. And then, you know, because I guess in that case, it gives me some time to go back through and edit out some of Hanna's delusions and some of his ums and ahs. And so just let us know what you think. And we still are planning on releasing every Tuesday, though, so that will not change. It may not be, again, live anymore, but, hey, you know, we try.
Are we still going to be getting yelled at when we swear too much? Or when you swear too much?
Yeah, probably. Anyway, so for tonight we have some great topics. You know, we decided we wanted to do a discussion on the pros and cons of large mass protests. And, you know, this is going to be a wide range of articles. We're kind of going to look at both sides of the debate. And we're going to kind of see where people land, right? And the big thing here isn't going to be because we're going to be able to shell this out or give you the answer. I don't think there is an answer. And in one of the articles we actually read, they talk about if you have the answer, either you're an asshole for, you know, withholding it, or you're false and full of crap because you really don't know. And I think that's closer to how I feel about it. But I wanted to kind of go through where the protests are and what's efficient or not efficient for people, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Hanna, but, you know, where you stand as an individual versus, you know, where I stand. And
we're all over the place, so I can't wait to get into that one.
We're also going to be looking at the science behind something that's kind of been about for, I don't know, at least a year now. The Telegraph had an article about nanomachines drilling cancer cells and being able to kill different types of cancer in 60 seconds. And so they actually have a follow-up article in 2017 that talks about the progress of the scientific article and study that happened over the last year. And the reason why I wanted to cover that is because it kind of gives a brief overlay, and then you get the update for it to tell you where the science has gone, if it achieved what it wanted to achieve. And then lastly, we're going to have to talk about hurricanes. And for anybody out there who lives in a hurricane-laden state right now, please be very cautious.
They're probably so sick of hearing about it. It's like, oh my God, the hurricanes.
Yeah, they probably are. And so, we're not going to be discussing, whether God caused the hurricanes or, whether it's all the gay people that cause the hurricanes or if it's all the Democrats tomorrow or the women the next days. We're going to actually talk about a little bit of, do the hurricanes show a sign that climate change is on a rise? And because we talk about climate change a lot. That's like a big thing for us here. That's one of the favorite topics of Hannah and I outside of evolution is we like to talk about climate change. And so we want to actually examine a couple of different articles along with the actual recorded hurricane history for the last, let's say, 150 years. And so we actually want to see, has climate change been affected that greatly towards the hurricanes, or is this just another device the left likes to use to argue for more money for government?
So we're going to possibly be debunking Rush Limbaugh's crazy idea that Hurricane Irma may be some fake news out of the left. I think that's one of the things that I heard, that Rush has been saying some crazy things. And we'll also kind of sort of mention some of the posts, and people are really quick to jump on and share some of these things that it's like the new hurricanes 100% guarantee climate change kinds of stuff. We want to take a little more cautious look at it and see if it's the best idea to be just sharing everything you see that confirms your position.
Yeah, your cognitive bias.
Ah.
There you go. Again, we want to thank our Patreon sponsors. Thank you again so much for supporting the show. You can head over to patreon.com, and for less than, and I literally mean this, less than the cost of a Diet Coke, a soda, a beer, or even an energy drink, you can support the show for $1 an episode. And again, all it does is help us donate to other charities, which we have coming up here in the next 3 weeks, along with us creating a better podcasting material via equipment for you to hear. So if you want to head over there, be happy to. Otherwise, share the link, tell your friends about us, and let them know how they can get involved. With that being said, we got to talk about getting involved in protests. And I'll be honest, protesting has somewhat been part of my genes since I was a child. We protest outside of abortion clinics when I was a Christian. My parents protested quite a bit, not always in the streets, but, sometimes in the restrictions in my household, with some of the crazy things that I was not able to, do as a child. And so, the protesting side of this has always kind of been part of my nature. It's never been something that I haven't somewhat embraced in some way, shape, or form. And that we talk about street evangelism we had before. And when I was a kid, we did street evangelism. Well, not as much.
Do you still have some of those signs? Do you still have some of the signs?
No, I don't have any of the signs, no. We didn't make, because it wasn't the type of street preachers you think of today. We were the missionaries. We were out there handing people out food and saying, hey, do you want this? Or like I told the example about the fair the other day that we were at, and they said, hey, you want a face painting in a Bible story? Well, no. I'll take the face painting, but I don't want the bloody Bible story. That was how I grew up. And we went on mission trips and all these different things. So for me, the protest, whether it was a passive or a direct action type protest, was something that's kind of been ingrained in my being from, just the the religious mumbo jumbo that I had growing up.
For me, it's been pretty much the exact opposite. Until I was in college and started getting a little bit more of the world, I used to tell people, I don't care about politics. I don't pay attention to politics. I essentially use the same ideas like being an apatheist. It didn't matter to me. It didn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. I didn't pay taxes. I didn't keep track of any of that kind of stuff. And so I never really was out there. Lately, obviously, I've become more involved, and mostly through the nonviolent stuff with just basically online social activism. But more than that is connecting and communicating, talking with my direct representatives, and I've been helping out a little bit more and trying to do things, the local politics thing. So I'm trying the passive, because we've talked about this multiple times. Is that I've been lucky enough to never really have been, flustered in my life to have to get out there in the streets, and that's something that'll come up in this as well. Is whether or not you can be comfortable to sit back and not get onto the streets, so that you could do the more progressive stuff, or you could basically think that street protests don't work. So is that kind of the idea that we were talking about here? Is so we're going to do pros and cons of both sides. So
yes, yeah, a little bit, because yes, there is some scientific reports that have come out, and that have been prevalent for the last 5 to 6 years that actually talk about this.
So like a scientific report essentially analyzing, okay, there was a protest here. How many people? Did it go good? Did it go bad? Or what is the report?
No, it was actually more of online studies, how people would, they put some surveys out, how people would react. They created different conditions and put people up to these different types of communication, for these different types of experiments, right?
Okay, so this was actually talking to people and creating scenarios and testing out what would happen. At least that's what it looks like. So like these are kind of like simulations then.
Yes, not the Matrix, but close.
We're not going to plug you in. We're just going to connect to your Facebook, which is close enough.
Anyway, so the first article that I wanted to kind of cover was from The Atlantic, and this one is a little bit older. This is actually from 2014, and the reason I chose this is because I said, okay, right now it's a polarized time, right? Right now, a lot of the articles are going to come out either pro or con. No matter which way you look at it, no matter what you do, they're going to come out as a pro or con article. And so my take here is there older articles and older studies and different things we can look at that actually talk about this? And it's kind of funny because The Atlantic originally aired this in 2014 about why street protests don't work. And then again, they aired another article called The Psychology of Effective Protest. But essentially, the articles are pretty identical. They talk about the same study. They talk about the same logic behind it. And either which way, I wanted to look at an article and talk a little bit about something, that had happened before this whole Trump garbage train wreck, drove through our nation. And so, they talk about, what draws people to a protest, right? Well, media coverage. Research actually shows that journalists or the media love anything that can be related as a novel, that you could tell as a story. And they talk about the psychology behind protests that show perversely extreme protests, like Berkeley, for example, at the time, and how it undermines the overarching goal of attracting more people to their movement. Now, I sat there and I thought, okay, so if you had a movement, let's say we called it the Cellar Door Skeptics Revolution, which we kind of have said for a long time, and we say, hey, we're going to create a revolution, if we were to use violent tactics, what would you think of us? Would you think of this? If we were out in the streets throwing garbage cans saying we're going to overthrow Trump, or we're going to, make sure we get wage equality no matter however we do it. And if we start walking on the streets with bayonets, you're probably not going to think very fondly of the two white guys with weapons walking down the street. It's just probably not, a good image. And so they talk about how there's a hodgepodge of groups that participate in non-formal affiliation with each other, that have no clear hierarchy and no obvious leaders. And in all fairness, when we kind of look at Black Lives Matter, originally when it first started, it didn't have a hierarchy structure, didn't have a formal affiliation. It was a smaller group that started based on, an extremely horrible circumstance that never should have happened. And so what they do is this article starts off by basically talking about how if we look at it and we look at the world as a whole, a lot of what's happening, you have all these small groups. Are they really good connecting together? And are they doing anything afterwards? Because what makes a good organization? If we have a good organization is out campaigning. They're sticking their middle finger, or not their middle fingers, but their fingers inside of the government pot. They're turning around and gathering people to their cause. They're trying to grab both sides of the aisle to gain a larger point of view. They're sitting here doing small, peaceful protests. They're using nonviolence. And they're talking with the media in a way that is showing them as, hey, we're here, we're serious, we're just like any other organization. We just want to fight something. And so, the article kind of says, well, what's the difference between if that happens and if we start going out and throwing bricks through windows and saying, hey, screw you, all of you, stop killing black people?
Yeah,
and that's
it's-
what the article talks about.
They're essentially bringing up the difference between like an organized top-down march and I wouldn't call it a riot, but essentially a online mass of people who are all there, who all relatively agree on a general negative thing that needs to be fixed. There's way too much inequality. Black people shouldn't be targeted more than white people when it comes to the police. Our prison system specifically targets minorities and nonviolent drug offenders way more than it does real people who have made real significant problems. Whatever isolated topic is for that general consensus of all those people, it's essentially chaos. It's all kinds of different factions coming in, but there's no real tight knit connection. And that's what they're talking about here. Is that these groups come in and everybody has a great idea. They want to come out and they smash things up, but they basically don't have any kind of connection for longevity. And that's something that I've been hearing is after the Women's March, right after Trump was elected, people were saying, this is absolutely breathtaking. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. This is a great march. No violence, no police, no murders, no anything. But everybody was saying, is this something that's going to stick around? So this isn't a controversial march, right? This wasn't a controversial nationwide thing. It just didn't catch any kind of traction because it was so loose knit. It's really easy to get tons of people on the internet interested in something so warm and I guess progressive as women's rights and equality. But it takes a lot more work to get people to actually stick around week after week and do stuff after their 12-hour days because everybody's working more. That's the harder part. And so the street protests that are really well organized, like marches that have a location here, they got their permits, they get everything ordered, and then there's just a giant mass of people. Like that's what they're saying is the mass of people, does it really help anything? Or is it potentially just an area where people can cause more damage and destruction to whatever topic they're trying to push?
Yeah, and in the article they talk about this. They say there is a study by Anders Kolding Jorgensen of the University of Copenhagen, and essentially the individual created a Facebook group to protest the demolition of a historic stork foundation or fountain in a major square, and 10,000 people joined in the first week. After 2 weeks, the group had 27,000 members strong. That was the extent of the experiment, though. There was never an actual plan to demolish the fountain, and he simply just wanted to show how easy it was to gather a large following on social media. Now, this does talk a little bit, right, about slacktivism and, keyboard activism. And I don't want to go towards that because that's a whole different topic that we could get into, and I don't really want to get into that, but kind of what that's
We're talking more getting bodies out of your house and into the streets a little bit. Like the slacktivism thing just stays in your computer. But this is like getting people into the streets still. Yeah. So like an actual street protest.
And they stopped doing everything and everybody fell off the bandwagon. And so they say this. They say behind massive street demonstration, there is rarely a well-oiled and more permanent organization capable of following up with protesters' demands and understanding the complex face-to-face and dual political work that it takes to produce a real change in government. And they say this is an extremely important thing because before the internet, there was tedious work involved in organizing that was required to circumvent citizen censorship or to actually organize a protest while building the infrastructure and making these strategies sustainable. Now movements can sidestep all that and just offer their own deterrent. And we could talk, I guess in all fairness, Hannah, you and I were part of Atheist Analysis. That's kind of what Atheist Analysis was. When we first started, we were very excited. We wanted to change the world, what was our slogan? I don't even remember what there
really wasn't one.
No, we had one. We'll have to look it up later. Anyway, so we created a lot of momentum, started creating blog posts, got all these people involved in it, and then all of a sudden somebody was like, okay, so what's your point? Great. I'm glad that you're making atheists feel comfortable, but all you guys do is bash theists. All you want to do is argue with theists. You guys aren't developing any content outside of the norm. Like, I'm concerned about social matters, and somebody over here is like, well, are you a feminist or not? And, that's when our group started to splinter because, in all fairness, we were just a bunch of people that came together who all had one common thing, atheism, and nothing else was in common. Now, you and I did, which is probably why we're, still doing things together, but a lot of the other people in the group disagreed with us, and so we were this very well-oiled machine from a small standpoint. But once we grew large enough where it took actual manpower or somebody to basically run this like a job, it started to fall apart, and we started to splinter because we all had different, pulls in different directions. And
even if we pulled in different directions, like some people just made some really bad decisions and kind of ruined and deflated the whole thing. So it just takes one person to kind of kill the momentum for a whole, one financial whatever to ruin stuff. I mean, that's what it takes to kill something. And what you said, like people were asking us, like, well, what do you do? That was one of the first things that Arlene over at Michigan Atheist, before she passed, the first time we went and talked and gave a speech at the Michigan Atheist convention, I was describing and talking to her about everything that we did, and she said, "Well, that's great, you got a blog, but what do you actually do?" I said, "Well, we do podcasts, or we do videos, and I mentioned that we were gonna do a homeless drive to feed the homeless." She says, "Okay, now you're doing something," because she essentially said, "You've got a blog, so does everyone else. What do you actually do?" Like, she called me out like in the first 10 minutes of ever talking to her, and she's just like, "Well, do something." And I thought that was pretty cool, because that's what she had been doing for so many years, running an organization like that.
Yeah, and I agree, because, as that article ends, it kind of talks about the powerful political engine that can run in the streets. It can move extremely fast and produce a lot of political energy. But if the engine is not connected to the wheels, neither is the movement.
Yeah,
and achieving that motion requires organizations capable of old-fashioned and permanent political work that can leverage street demonstrations into political change and policy reform. And I think that the important thing here is, and we again, I'm not telling everybody I'm taking this side. I'm not saying that this is my opinion. I'm telling you this is where the science is going, or went, and what it talks about. And in all fairness, we both experienced this in real life. We weren't part of a larger, organization that could change things. And when you're in church, right? And I know you weren't super involved in church, but when I was in church, they were helping change things. They were creating a way to help people change their minds. They were creating a way to get people to vote a certain way. And then they were turning around and coming together as a community. How many times did we go out and create dinners for people? How many times did I get stuck spending my weekends moving once I hit a certain age with my father, helping people move at the church? Because it was free labor.
That's the infrastructure that's already created. We don't have that infrastructure in the non-believer communities yet. I mean, if it ever gets developed, that would be the biggest difference, where we actually start seeing some real things. American Atheists have tried to start some of that stuff, but it's really hard to do that, and it costs a lot of money. So the churches have been doing it for so long that they don't need to create it. It's already there. And so that's one of the things I talk about in this as well, is that you have to create that infrastructure, something that's going to be a machine that continues on for a long time. That's why. And then when we move on past this, I don't know if you had anything other than that, like why the protests work. We'll talk about some of that as well. And that's actually got some points as to, the ones that create something.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick commercial break. And yes, because so they talk about the failures of this, right? They talk about why sometimes protests don't work. But we're going to get into next why protests do work from the other side, and why a wonderful woman named L.A. Kaufman wrote a book called Direct Action, Protests and Reinvention of American Radicalism. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
This is Ishmael Brown, the HNIC from the Angry Black Rant podcast, and you're listening to the Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hey, all you listeners, I'm Robert.
And I'm Amy from Secular Yakking.
And we just wanted to let you know that if you've got 30 minutes to kill,
then we're the podcast for you. We're just some old married couple who's been yakking at each other over the many years.
And we thought we should start making it so you can listen in on our yakking.
We dig past the mainstream and bring you the news that you may or may not have heard about.
We take a look at politics, religion, science, and pretty much anything we feel like yakking about and sharing it with you. And let us not forget our weekly Mr. Potter Award.
No, we're not professionals on anything we talk about, but we love to yak about stuff and give you our opinion on the matter.
So tune in at secularyakking.com or check out our feed on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and anywhere good podcasts can be heard.
And who knows what craziness will happen.
Yeah, just like this.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.
Hey guys, this is Wyatt Mathers from the Atheist Avengers podcast. You are listening to the Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you again for joining us on our 97th episode. If you've been a trooper this long, you deserve a pat on the back. And I'll tell you what, if you want to be part of the live show, send us an email. We'll make anybody part of the live show for our 100th anniversary episode here in the next, 3 weeks? I think it's 3 weeks here, barring any tragedies or anything else that happens to any of the equipment.
Well, that or whether or not I get this pitchfork that we just lit. We're going to go march on the streets and start burning stuff. Is that the plan?
Maybe.
No?
I kind of do like to do that. You should know me. I mean, I'm kind of in that camp, buddy. But
you always talk about being that what do you call it? The anarchist, socialist anarchist.
Social anarchist, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was. So because that's what I always heard. Noam Chomsky was always talking about the socialist libertarians, and so that's kind of been taken over by the social anarchist.
Yeah, well, there's a difference between the socialist libertarian and the socialist anarchist. One is going to tend to say that socialism can be derived through very lean practices in terms of how the government interacts, and that businesses will cowtail, I think it's how you say that, cowtail to essentially, the movement of people, such as, like what we're talking about here. Whereas more of the anarchists are saying, well, sometimes we need to take to the streets and we need to demonstrate, and sometimes we just need to take action into our own hands. And that we're not going to let corporations or the larger government dictate things. We're going to drive the larger government to support us in a more socialistic economy and standpoint.
That's a pretty tough one. We should do an episode on that and talk more about what that specifically is in the future. But so, let's say you're a social anarchist and you're out in the streets and you're going to start smashing things and be loud and angry, and you're going to have yourself a wild and loud protest. Why would that work?
Well, it depends. If you read some of the articles that we've been reading and what we're going to actually be talking about for the next segment, there's a lady named L.A. Kaufman, and she's been essentially a grassroots activist for the last, 40 to 50 years. That's been her thing. She recently wrote a book called Direct Action, Protest and the Reinvention of American Radicalism. And essentially, she started out as a journalist, and she says that she's experienced a good deal of the history, and she's able to recount it firsthand. So she's participated in rallies. She was in part of ACT UP actions, Dyke marches, Earth First, backwood encampments, and any other different sorts of direct action protests that have been around since, let's just say at least the 50s and 60s. And the reason
it says that she started in multiple worlds of American radicalism since 1980.
Yes. Yep.
So she's got 4 more years of being a political activist than I have living.
And essentially, the reason why this struck me is because, we have Antifa, right? Antifa is, a big thing right now. And we have Black Lives Matter, and we have some other radical groups that have, drawn up over the centuries. And people talk about how these radical groups, that use violence are terrorist groups, and we shouldn't be doing these things. And so essentially what I wanted to do is, in the first segment, we kind of looked at an article that essentially said that large protests don't work because there's not a good backbone or structure behind it. She's kind of saying the opposite. She's saying that essentially, even if we have a decentralized network, we can have a lot of organizations with not a specific leader and not just one organization that could come together as different groups and many different networks, and because they're all working for the same cause, they can create what's called a web of resistance. And
I like that too. I mean, really do. That's kind of like the optimal thing. So like what I mentioned a little while ago about the Women's March, that if there was like, some kind of a broader movement that kind of happened, a loose knit community across the whole of the interwebs, obviously national in the United States or whatever, but worldwide as well, that comes out of that, then that would be great. And hopefully, out of these giant things, some small, living organism, starts. But that's something that we haven't seen a whole lot of. And so I wanted it. That's an optimal situation. I don't know if it happens as much as this as Elliot Kaufman would say it does. I think it was a little bit more likely to happen back in the day when there was much more, I guess, work to go out and protest than it is nowadays in the early or the easy days of the internet.
Yeah. And she says that, because there is all these different, organizations that are working together, that there is different types of protests. You do have your online protests, you have your in the street violent protests, you have your peaceful marches. She talks about direct action though. She says, what is direct action? You got to think about this. If direct action is only blowing up buildings and, beating police to death, well, that's not what I would consider direct action. She actually goes into this whole thing about talking about how direct action can be anything and can be defined anywhere between just going out and voting or actually demonstrating in the street saying, we no longer want you in office. So such as what we're kind of seeing with the current administration. And she says, but there's all sorts of different protests. Some work better than others for different jobs. And that the whole point of this is that you don't use one type of action for everything. You have to use different tools in your tool bag for different things. For example, you wouldn't use a hammer when you really need a screwdriver. In my house, I might, because I'll see it and I'll go, the hammer's the closest, the screwdriver's over there. I could grab the hammer. I bet I can hammer that screw into the wall. And I probably could. It would be a lot harder, but I could. But she says, by and large, the most basic lesson that she has taken at looking at the history of grassroots movements is that the movements that use bold protest tactics win more and succeed more than movements that don't. And movements that limit themselves to things like letter writing campaigns or polite meetings with their legislator seem to kind of have a minimal impact. Let's digest that, right? Think about that.
Yeah. Without question, for me, I like what she's saying here is that you need to use a scalpel, a pocket knife, a saw blade, a chainsaw, when those things are the tools that are needed. And this is exactly kind of why I'm in the middle with a lot of these types of protests and what should be happening. So like some people out there think that you just need to have a full-on anarchist style riot or just complete go nuts for everything. What she's saying is that different things work really, really well at different times. So like the idea of an angry march in the streets, but using things like blocking traffic and stuff like those are considered direct actions. Like that's what she's talking about is if you block traffic, that is a nonviolent way of imposing your will and disrupting things. Like I really think that is you need to be as aggressive as it calls for, because once you go past that, then it can become detrimental.
Exactly. And, the article kind of talks to her and she says, well, think about it. You were part of the post-60s generation who was typically radicalized by the sense of the future being foreclosed upon by the threat of nuclear annihilation, ecological catastrophes, government insolvencies, and the erosion of abortion rights and the ravageness of AIDS. Do you feel, and this is what the article is asking Elliot Kaufman, do you feel that this is happening again in 2017? And we could talk about cycles, and that'd probably be an important topic for the show at some point. I mean, you can look at cycles, and you can look at history, how it kind of sometimes repeats it. Well, it repeats itself quite a bit, and how people don't always learn from it. They only learn a little bit. I mean, for example, we have Nazis marching in the street, for Christ's sake. You would think at this point people would be like, yeah, they shouldn't march in the street, we're going to punch them. Yeah, I get they have rights to do that, but they're Nazis trying to exterminate other people's rights. Do you understand what they're arguing for here?
I'm so glad I didn't mention it at the beginning, because when we were talking about it, when we were saying we were going to talk about protests and going through our research that we have here, I was going to say, and there's not going to be a mention of Nazis.
there is. 'Cause I can't help myself.
It's gone. We're no longer innocent.
But they ask her, and she says through all her years of experience, she says this, and I want to point this out because I find this very relevant, right? I find it relevant because of the times that we are in, and because we are being challenged, by some people on the right to say, hey, are you all being a little too extreme? What about all these leftists? What about all these Antifa people? I mean, this is just too extreme for me. We don't fit in this camp.
It's the many sides, on many sides.
And so she says this, she says, I do feel that we are in that, or that the media is portraying it, and that people genuinely feel that they're dealing with marginalization, defeat over and over again in the exact same way they did during the Reagan years and before. They're hit. We're being hit all over. And it's relevant because the sense of looming catastrophe helps mobilize people in a different way than it has before. And she says this, she says, because I think movements in that period have passage sums up to be tender that minorities and them see themselves. I guess I'll cut that part. She says this, that as looming catastrophe mobilizes people in different ways, because I think movements in that period, some have passages that sum up that tend to have themselves portrayed as minorities, and people start to identify with the minorities because they're starting to see the more extreme things that happen. And a big difference now is, she says this, she says, I think that the sprawling resistance is some way very fundamental to how we can represent our country and maybe simultaneously take it back. Because of the impending doom. We have impending doom. And there's millions and millions of people that are now experiencing this. We have a president, for Christ's sake, that can't say no to Nazis. We have a president that, has whitewashed a little bit of what he wants to talk about. And that's what's important here, is that
we may have a pending nuclear holocaust as well. I mean, let's just put that out there. We've got short-tempered orange Cheeto face that is going to potentially be making decisions on nuclear issues very soon.
Exactly. And so what's happened is when people started to step up and the government didn't respond, the government didn't say, hey, we hear you, we're going to meet you in the middle somewhere, and they continue to walk farther to the right. That's what's happening now. More people technically voted for Hillary Clinton. I'm sorry, Trumpites. I get it. He won, but he didn't win the popular vote. That is a fact. And you can't minimize it by trying to say that there's minorities or, immigrants that should never have voted and they swung it. And so that's my problem here, is you're seeing the majority of the people, even though the political system is not set up that way, you are seeing the majority of people saying, we didn't vote for this guy. And it's now getting worse. Now more people are saying, I shouldn't have voted for this guy because he's making horrible decisions. And that's the thing here. What's happening?
So will that drive everyone to a peaceful protest or an angry protest?
Well, depends.
We don't know yet.
Well, I think we kind of do see what's going on. I mean, we're seeing protests getting more violent on both sides. And
on many sides.
On many sides, we are though, and that's a fact. I mean, it's an okay fact. I mean,
it is.
It's a fact. So I think we should always state the facts. And I'm not saying Antifa is bad for creating violence. All I'm saying is that there is violence on both sides of the thing. The difference is the philosophy that one side holds over the other is inherently violent. When we actually genuinely look at what white supremacists and people that are deeply entrenched in this government, right-wing, far right-wing rhetoric, they're talking about extreme prejudice and not understanding how things work for people in a minority situation. The other side is just reacting to that. And that's a huge difference here in the type of violence. If I hit you, Hannah, you have the right to hit me back. You don't have to, but you do have the right. If enough people walk down the street hitting you, at some point you're going to get up and hit some of them back, even if it means you might go to jail. At some point you're just going to start hitting them back. And the difference is now that the political environment has allowed for us to become more of a vocal voice, saying, "Yeah, we're all going to start hitting back, even if our privilege does not allow for us to specifically be, directly associated with the type of, the type of discrimination that minorities see."
Yeah, I would just say that. Yeah, I agree entirely. Like we're seeing more and more younger people, more and more people willing to jump up and just go full on to the offensive. And so, like you said, one's a reactive, and one is a philosophy of violence. And then there's also areas in the middle where people are getting sucked from the center into both of those. I love what Kaufman basically says when she's been talking about, like, in her books and all the different groups and the philosophy and the norms among activists. They're constantly debating the tactics. So that's the most important thing, is that in the past, when we had the Black Panthers on one side and we had Martin Luther King on the other side, we had, much more militaristic, much more violent, and prone to physical control. And then we had the non-violent section. Of both those groups were basically working for the same thing. They had a disagreement on tactics and what works best. And then so what we saw was kind of an accumulation of both of those things turning into the civil rights movement. And that's kind of what I would like to see. It's like, I appreciate what Antifa is doing. I appreciate them taking, to arms in the streets, because they think that might be the best way. I really think that they should stay as the reactionary thing instead of going out and specifically looking for the violence, and hopefully people don't do that. But I would also love to see much more of the, block the freeway or protest in the streets and shut down the city, wherever, city hall or wherever you are that your protest is happening. So like having a blend of that, and then everybody just trying as best they can to avoid, I guess, the harshest of everything. And that's kind of what she's saying, is like, we all need to figure out what worked in the past and look to the past and actually learn from what they did. And hopefully we can figure out what the best pressurable units and what they are as far as who can be pushed the best way. I mean, Kaufman wrote a great or her book apparently writes it really well. So this is definitely something that I'd be interested in reading. I would recommend it to everyone else too, it sounds like.
Yeah, and she says this. She says, if you think about it, there's broader points here, right? That, the scientific article that we talked about in the first segment is kind of, it's just saying you're sapping public support, right? You're narrowly focusing on one consequence and you're missing the broader point. She says, where I have a fundamental different perspective than these authors of the paper posits about the movements that use strong tactics to gain attention, and then the author is conflating gaining attention with gaining popular approval. She goes on to say, often trying to gain popular approval, often we don't care because we aren't using these tactics to gain broader public approval. It's to change things. And that's actually an extremely valid point, an extremely fair point. And it's kind of one where, before I was like, hey, there's a scientific article that says we should protest more logically. And then all of a sudden you read her saying, you're like, think about it. So what? So what if it doesn't gain a larger movement? Did we create a voice? All we're trying to do is create a voice. If enough of us try and create a voice, we're going to create a larger voice that's going to make a change. And yeah, maybe it's not going to change politically because we don't have millions of dollars to go fund a corrupt political system that we have. But we do have the voice to walk in the streets, to shut down the highways, to tell the cops, no, you're not going to kill people. Or even in the case of the Dakota Pipeline, to say, this is our land. Do not poison us. Stop poisoning people. And then that's the larger statement here. She says there's lots of factors, lots of different factions, lots of ways that we can do this. But the point is that there is no simple, easy answer to this. And that's exactly why we've tried different things over many years.
Well, I got one quick thing. It's like what it seems like that first paper where they talk about, just getting the massive support online and that being like considered, a feasible and, a wow, they basically wrested a bunch of political support from the average people. Is that kind of seems to us like, oh, well, that's not really going to be a very effective political move. But that kind of seems like the entirety of Trump's campaign. It was a campaign by popularity. Like when you're saying essentially that we need to, we get it. Like you've got a ton of followers on Facebook, but that doesn't turn into anything real. Well, apparently Trump turned it into something real. So we do have to respect that is a big thing now. It's not just something you can snub your nose at and saying, oh, those are just slacktivists. It turned into something.
Yes, and I would like to point out the women's movement because, the whole women's march was a big thing. And that was a very peaceful protest, right? They marched on the street. But that was huge. That didn't come from this large national Democratic organization that said, hey, we're going to throw millions of dollars in advertising. That was a grassroots movement that took off, that got a lot of people motivated to go to Washington, to go to Lansing, to go to all their different major capitals and protest.
But has it done anything since then, though? That's the question that I got. Like, I haven't really seen a lot about legislation and things yet.
So you're right. Maybe it's not changing legislation, but is it changing people's attitude towards women? Is it changing people's attitude towards the conversation? Is it creating a conversation when it in and of itself, right? And
I would hope so.
Exactly. And the last article that we have that we'll touch on really briefly is from 1999. Yes, it's an old article from L.A. Kaufman when she wrote for The Salon. And she was talking about back in the day in 99 when Seattle protesters were trying to shut down different things. And essentially, even she talks about this. She says even nonviolent blockaders are comfortable with some level of interfering with property rights, disrupting traffic, and preventing business as usual.
Yeah.
It was the nonviolent blockade, after all, that forced the WTO to cancel its opening ceremony on November 30th and prevented delegates from reaching the convention center. That's important. That's hugely important. She's not saying...
That's nonviolent. That's the big thing. That's just, stopping traffic. Like, what are you going to do? You can't do anything. Nowadays, I think the police and the militarized whatever might be a little bit more likely to just drive a snow plow through the people. I mean, it sure seems like it. I mean, back then maybe they would have been a little bit more resistant and wait for someone to do something, but these days I don't know if that same tactic would work.
Yeah. And she says, for the most part, rioters believe that destroying property is not violent. She even says it. She says it's strategic. It's a strategic claim. An activist about reclaiming the streets of New York and Brooklyn, right? And they were helped organized by some DAN blockade network that expresses the views of many people that lived in the city at the time. I personally am not against I'm personally not against property destruction. I don't consider it a violent action. I do consider it often a stupid action, but not a violent one. It's usually not wise in a crowded situation to endanger the public and escalate things, but I don't disagree with it or think it's violent. She's talking about how we have to sometimes radicalize. She's talking about how sometimes if we don't take a direct action all the way back down to strikes, to slowdowns, to work sabotage, to some sort of vandalism, that at some point people don't understand it. And if you push people to the point of not being able to do anything but fight back, where are you at? I mean, for example, we are listening to, and this is Thursday when we're recording this, we're listening to Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos literally talk about how she's going to roll back what she feels are inadequate rape culture type investigations. She's not saying, here's my solution. She's just saying, this is too harsh, I'm taking it back. Well, what's your solution? Oh, you don't have one? Oh, and wait, you're that worried about that many mistreated men being called out and taxed for this? When, oh, hey, how about a failing education system? Or, oh, how about the fact that rising costs of colleges are now sinking people into debt so far that they'd rather go to a trade school and earn less and be able to move less within the workforce? You're not going to address that? You're not going to address the crippling debt that we're all facing as students? $15,000 to $20,000 a year is such an astronomical, illogical thing. Think about it. 6 years of that is $120,000. That's a starter house for a lot of people. And instead of doing that, all she's doing is saying, I don't like this, therefore I got the power, I could change it. You're not creating change. So we can rally in the streets. We can go protest these things. And if it takes us saying, fine, we're going to start destroying some of these institutions to get back to the ground, what else do we have to do? None of you are listening. And that's the point of violent protests.
You could burn some of those busted-ass Detroit schools, get some insurance money on that shit. I've seen videos of some of those schools. I mean, if I was a school administrator and I walked into the gymnasiums in some of these schools, I would call it essentially it should be abandoned. There should be nobody inside these buildings. So
Yeah.
maybe she could take a look there instead of worrying about what I would say is a very rare situation of overreach. There's no way.
Exactly. And that's one of my big things here. I mean, you know, we had this whole thing in Flint, right? And it received national attention. We reported on this hundreds of times. But guess what? They're still being poisoned in Flint, for Christ's sake. I mean, for Christ's sake, we still have the governor in office that allowed for this. And yet, nobody cares that much. And so, I agree. Should we not use violence if we don't have to? Yeah. But I think at some point, I don't think we get a choice anymore. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics to talk about nanomachines and cancer. And maybe nanomachines is the way we get rid of some of the people that don't understand protests. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
You're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Join the revolution.
Hi, my name's Callie.
And I'm Ari.
If you're like most of us, you're very concerned about the gay agenda's plans for world domination.
Are you tired of seeing glitter all over every damn thing?
Do you hate rainbows as much as any other red-blooded American?
Then we have the answer for all your baseless fears and unjustified paranoia.
Presented exclusively on Secular Media Network, the Gaytheist Manifesto is your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement.
You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, and at gaytheistmanifesto.secularmediagroup.com.
If you're not ready to get in line for your mandatory gay marriage and you're terrified of short-haired women in pantsuits, come have a listen and get up to date on their plans. You'll be glad you did.
Considering how you want to help Cellar Door Skeptics, head over to iTunes or your favorite podcast app and give us a rating, because every rating helps push us in front of new listeners. And since our main goal here at Cellar Door Skeptics is to provide the most accurate information possible, we hope that more ratings will mean that more people get to hear the topics that we're presenting. We don't insist that we get a 5-star rating, but Hannah's favorite number is 5, and the more gold stars he gets, the more special he's gonna feel. So what do you say? Head on over to iTunes or Google Play, give us a rating, and help engage with Cellar Door Skeptics today.
Hey, my name is Jeremiah. And this is David from the God Theory Podcast. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution.
And now, back to Cellar Door Skeptics with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna. The show with the sources.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. If you were not energized by that last segment, I don't know what'll energize you, because I was energized. I like a little Energizer
I can't
bunny.
believe it. We managed. I was like, man, we're not gonna have Nazis. It's gonna be protests. It's gonna be Nazi free. Nope. They showed up. They showed up, and we punched them. That's just what happens. Sorry, guys.
Anyway, welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you so much again for joining us. If you missed the first 2 animated segments, we talked a lot about protests. So we thought that was a good topic. It was something that was fun. We were very educational. I spent a lot of time researching it, and I do think it's something that I'm very open to talking with people in the future. But
tell us what we got wrong, and now we're going to talk science.
Yeah, now we're going to talk science, because that's a little bit of our niche. You know, kind of more Hannah's niche because he's smarter than I am, but that's a little bit some of our niche here is the science. You know, we like to talk about science all the time, and we like to find articles about things that, you know, may not be as popular as other ones. In all fairness, though, this one did pop up on Reddit, and it, like, in all fairness, I was reading this article before it skyrocketed. A couple of days, you know, the day it was released, I discovered this article. Though I did discover it through Reddit, in all fairness. But I was discovering this article, and then that's when I started doing research, and saying, hey, Hannah and I actually had this discussion, I don't know, like, I think it was a couple of months ago we had this discussion, maybe 6 months ago. I don't know, we're old now, so I can't remember that far back. But we had this discussion about these little bugs that could infiltrate and kill cancer. And it kind of relates to the book that I'm reading called The Neuromancer, which is actually a book from 1984 that my buddy suggested to me that kind of talks a little bit about the Matrix and different technological advances from back there. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to give this book a shot. And, I started listening to the book, and then all of a sudden this article came up, and I was like, oh, now I got to look, this isn't talked about in that book. Well, because they're focusing on, enhancement type things, whereas this is focusing on removing horrible things from society.
Yeah, this entire thing is kind of what we've been talking about for micro machines. A few times that we've actually talked about micro machines and nano machines, because obviously micro and nano, like the numbers are getting smaller. This is from 2016 is when they first made some announcements, and they were creating these tiny little engines. They just for reference for like lay people's description, it's right in the title from the Telegraph. It's a million times smaller than an ant, but ANT is the acronym that they've been using for this, and actuating nanotransducer is what they call it. And these things are essentially they are activated by light, and so they've created using using gold and a few other chemicals and materials. They were able to make these things. Once light is on there, it constricts, and then when light is off it expands. And this kind of movement, having light, it's creating this compression and acceleration, and it's giving it direction. And so what they first started off with, this very first one here, is they've created these new particles that are just moving around. It's like an explosion.
They're
and these things
ants.
are going all over the place. Well, yeah.
That's
Ants if you just dump sugar everywhere, maybe.
But yeah, that's kind of what they, I know it's an acronym, right? For articulating nanotransducer, right? That's what it is. But they talk about ants, and they kind of talk about it in the way how ants actually work, inside of a colony, right? Mm-hmm. And they produce large forces of weight based upon, whatever activity they're doing.
Yeah, ants are really strong for their size, and so that's kind of what they're saying is these little tiny things can exert a lot of force.
Yes, and originally, when I went back and looked for the original article, it actually talked about how they're now trying to harness that energy, like you were saying, Hannah, through nano machine applications.
Yeah,
and that's
the original ones.
amazing.
The original ones, they didn't have any control. Like they were just like they made a little motor, but it was just chaos. I mean, it's just like insanity. They'd be shooting all over the place. So.
Yeah, like a golf ball or an explosion of golf balls, Like if you had like Happy Gilmore go out there and you gave him a bunch of amphetamine and you're like, here's 1 million balls, hit them. And he would just go, whack, whack, whack. And they'd all go, 400, 500 yards or whatever the hell he could shoot them as.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if we're getting that much direct. I'm guessing that they're probably pretty powerful, but Happy, you know what? I was not ready for a Happy Gilmore reference on that one. I will give you credit on that. You threw me for a loop there because I'm picturing like super strong golf ball shots. These are tiny, super strong little things. So I guess it does relevant. I mean, so we'll bring a Billy Madison quote in there. The judges, cha-ching. You're not going to get the angry judge that says you are awarded no points and may God have mercy on your soul. That one isn't quite so bad. So.
Yeah, and so that was what the original article talked about, is the strength of it, right? And then the new article that kind of came up back on August 31st was talking about how they can they can use these machines to drill into cancer cells and kill them in 60 seconds. Well, now, if you're either a cancer survivor or a family member of somebody that's been affected by cancer, the first thing you want to do is go, that's awesome. Not that it could help my situation, but it could help future generations.
Yeah, just plug me in, right? I mean, this is the kind of new experimental stuff that they've been testing. And, I mean, let's just face it. If we can create nanomachines that are smart enough that you can just use light to direct them and use them to destroy cancer cells. I mean, I'm guessing that's probably what brought you to this. You were ahead of the Reddit curve. You were like, man, they actually have machines that they can direct. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, especially at that thing. And, it's kind of funny because it reminds me of a Black Mirror episode, the last episode of season 3, where they basically had these fake bees that were these little, they're not nano machines, they're not that small, but they were essentially bees controlled, by electrical interference and the government and these radio waves. And they were able to do this extreme destruction based on that. And then I thought about these and I was like, holy crap. These people are using that technology for good. I hope they never watch that Black Mirror episode because they might try to take something over. But
that is what a lot of the people that are super worried about stuff like AI. It's like, well, what happens when artificial intelligence is given control over our systems? Because people are more and more likely to take a hands-off approach. We want it easier, so we'll allow an artificial intelligence to monitor, control, and take care of our weapons systems with our nuclear codes and all that stuff. And so the same thing with this is like, do we create an artificial intelligence that we send into our bodies, and we just trust that whoever created it didn't make a mistake, and those things aren't going to just start eating heart material? Like, you know, these are real things that we have to deal with. And it's like, potentially, if this nano machine, it can be smart enough to locate and isolate specifically a cancer cell, maybe it could jump on a T cell and completely compromise your immune system. You could get a cold and die. I mean, these are all ethical questions that we're dealing with. But this study here is specifically just trying to prove the scientific concept. And so what they've done is they've created these. There's a video in here that it's about 2/3 way down, and it shows the cancer cell membranes bubbling under the salt. So look for a little link right there. That's the specific sentence. What it does is it shows Rice University. They're the people that worked on this and the specifics of what they did and how they did it. It's really cool, and it's more interactive than listening to Deaf Kid talk about, you know, the happy science that I absolutely love. But this particular work was reported in Nature, so we do have some form of a respectable publication on this. And so what they've been talking essentially is they've managed to get these nanomachines from the bounce around to a directory associated, so they could tell them this is what you should be looking for, and then light will turn it on, and so that it will bring therapeutic agents, they said, into the cells. And so this therapeutic chemical or whatever would be tagging along, or they can just turn it into a missile to drive through and destroy the cancer cell specifically. So like, those are two very big things that are pretty concentrated and pretty smart. I'm absolutely flabbergasted they've been able to do this. This is amazing.
Well, and I would agree, and that's the big thing here. You know, I mean, our friend Jeremiah Bannister, his daughter died of cancer. Can you imagine what this could do for people like that, right? You know, for people that are dying of these terminal cancers, you could say, hey, look, we have a new technology that can help these things. And yeah, you bring up a good point, and actually that's kind of funny because my buddy and I have been talking about, I think it's called Roscoe's Basilisk theory, and we're going to cover that. Yes, we're going to cover that on the show. Because I never heard of it, and my buddy told me about it, and then, you know, he gave me shit because I didn't read the article the next week when we were sitting around drinking, and he's like, really? I can't believe you wouldn't be into this. So then I went and read it, and I was like, oh my god, holy crap, like, okay, this makes sense, and this, like, explains conspiracy theorists to a T, right? You know, and what you're talking about, you know, how could it could go destroy a T cell? Yeah, you're right, it could. But the probability that it's an artificial intelligence that would do that is just so far off the charts, extremely crazy. It's more logical that you or I would go, hey, we want to kill a bunch of people, therefore that's what we're going to do, than it would be that it's an AI. But that's not why I was drawn to the article. I know that's a conspiracy theory angle. I was drawn to the article because, yeah, can these things actually work? Is this something that Rice University, the people that work there, have actually discovered, that these nanomachines that are so smart that you could park 50,000 of them on a human hair? That's insane.
Yeah, the human hair is typically 0.004 inches, and so 50,000 then across 0.004 of an inch. In my business and industry, that's they call it 4,000ths, and that's essentially what it is. And so that's a really, really small space. So these things are nanoscale. So I believe in the nanoscale on metric system, that's 9 zeros ahead of it. Yeah. I think it's 9 or 6. I can't remember specifically. Either way, we're talking on a very, very small scale. So this is really cool stuff. And we're talking so small that these nanomachines, they have to spin at 2 to 3 million times per second in order to overcome obstacles and outpace natural Brownian motion. Now, Brownian motion is what Einstein won his Nobel Prize for. That's how big of a deal it is. And I specifically want to explain this one real quick to people because we're talking molecules and nanoscale. So the erratic motion in movement of microscopic particles in fluid. And so if you look down through a microscope at these particular machines in fluid, they would be moving all over the place. And there's really no explanation for why they would be moving all over. And what it is the result of continuous bombardment from the molecules in the surrounding fluid or medium. So like air, water, whatever. And so if you put like little bits of dust in water and just let them sit there, they were small enough particles of dust, they would be moving all over the place for no reason. Even if the water was completely stable and still, it's because of the motion in the atoms and the molecules in the water would be forcing them to move. So this was something, a very difficult problem that they couldn't solve, and Einstein actually solved it, or at least gave it a scientific basis and a mathematical basis. So he won the Nobel Prize for it. Like, this is a really big deal, and them being able to outpace that essentially means that these tiny things, which are small enough to be bashed around by just an H2O particle alone, like just 3 atoms connected to each other, are big enough to bash these things around. That's how small we're talking here. I mean, that's really cool that they were able to get it up to that kind of speed, but also 3 million times per second. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's insane. Just crazy amount. I don't know. I don't know.
It's really impressive.
I agree. And that's the thing here, right? Is we're living in this age of technology that just goes above and beyond, right? And it says, in the study, we have shown that we can drill into cells, animal cells, human cells, using these nanomachines. They will attach to the surface, and then a light will be shown upon them, and they'll drill right through this cell. So if we can figure out a way to harness this for the betterment of humanity, all I can say is, yay, science. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about something even more amazing. Hurricanes and the history of climate change. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Holy crap, the vlogcast. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Do you know where Saskatchewan is? Probably not. It's in Canada. If you do, you might know a city named Regina. In Regina, there's a studio. And in that studio, there are, at least once a month, a bunch of skeptical atheist geeks and goofballs who get together to do a podcast. We are the Brainstorm Crew, and we're trying to help spread a bit of reason and critical thinking while still having fun. Never taking things too seriously, but still not accepting everything we're told. We go through different topics, exploring them in depth, and often disagreeing. We try to stick to provable facts, and we never trust in myth. That's why we say we're woo-free since 2013. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spreaker under Brainstorm, or check out our website, brainstormblog.net. I can't promise you'll always agree with us, but I can promise you'll have fun listening to us.
Looking for something new and exciting, or maybe just a change from the old Atheist Show format? Cellar Door Skeptics Podcast provides listeners with hours of enjoyment each week on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out as we talk politics, religion, science, reviews of books and music, along with the occasional interview just for a twist. Join Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as they bring fresh content to you. Walk with us through the cellar door as we help you prepare for the revolution. You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and even on Facebook.
Hey, what's up? I'm Steve Hayes.
And I'm Dave Curry.
And we're from Prophetcast.
And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics
on the Fox News Network.
They're not affiliated with Fox.
Everyone's a Fox affiliate.
Now, back to the show.
Oh, welcome back to another Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you again so much for sticking around with us through this amazing nuclear-tastic episode.
Nuclear. I thought I heard you say nuclear. So you say N-U-C... N-U-C-U. Like President Bush used to say, instead of nuclear, you say nuclear.
Nuclear.
Oh, man.
If you call me Bush, you and I are going to have a problem.
Let everyone else let's say everyone that listens to this, let us know which one's the way you're supposed to say it. Are you supposed to say nuclear or nuclear? Because I say it the way it's spelled.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Let's hear what everybody else is saying.
Anyway, what we decided to do is we decided to have a conversation a little bit about hurricanes, right? Because, I mean, I'm not going to say this is the most important topic, but, I mean, it kind of has rocked the nation, and it's put a lot of people out of homes. It's killed a lot of people, and there's another one coming next week that is pretty important, right? You know?
Yeah, and Irma, the one that's coming right now, but they said there's another one forming right behind it. This is going to be like an assault rifle blast.
It is. And so, I don't know. Part of me says, and we talked about it, how it's not able to be looked at in the same light because it's not really that big of a threat, and it's just something that people are kind of making up, and it's this big, large conspiracy theory that has taken off. Well, a lot of people feel that way about climate change. People feel climate change is a conspiracy theory to everything, right? It's just this big conspiracy hoopla that is creating issues.
Rush Limbaugh said that Irma is a complete liberal conspiracy theory, and it just took out like 90% of
Bermuda.
I can't. What is it?
The Bermuda Islands.
It's Bermuda, and there's another one. Antigua, I think, is one. I can't remember. I know what the reason I know it is because of the Beach Boys song, but either way, like they were talking about a bunch of the small islands or whatever. And they're like, the president was on. He's like, we basically lost 90% of the structures on this island. Like everything is gone. That's how hard it is. And if it's going to hit Florida at full bore, they're saying that storm surges could be as much as 10 to 12 feet.
Yes, and so I want to stop real quick. And if you're in Florida and you're listening to this, please leave. Like, do not risk your life. I get that it's. I'll tell you what. If you need to, come to Michigan. Hannah and I will make spare rooms for you. We'll let you live in our basements for free, just because. Don't die over some stupid hurricane. I don't know. I've never had to live through this before, so.
I offered the same thing to a friend of mine in Turkey. I told her and her husband, I said, if you guys get so bad, if you can get out of that country and into the United States, you have a place to stay. Without question.
Yeah, and it is really,
that's the way it should be.
It's just really sad that these hurricanes are happening, and that I guess the nice part about it is it's not politically driven, right? These people that are saying, "Well, look at these hurricanes, it's Trump and this," it's like, shut the fuck up. I don't. It has nothing to do with politics. This is just literally the weather being shitty. And if there is a God, if God did fucking exist, this is I'm the God of shit. I'm the God that's going to torture you and make you think I'm going to do a bunch of awesome things and then I'm going to do something really shitty. That's this God. And so, we could talk about theology all day long, and maybe we should do another theology episode because
we haven't done one in a while.
I like to rant about that.
It'd be really easy to explain without question. I mean, beyond a scientific doubt, why God is punishing innocent people for transgender people existing. That is just without question the easiest thing.
This it's disgusting that anybody would ever say that. And and we didn't cover the Olstein thing for a specific reason because there's two sides to the story. We don't know all the sides of the story. And in reality, for me, the bigger thing is okay, fine, the megachurch isn't doing anything. Where's the rest of the population stepping up? And why is our government not saying, hey, evacuate, let me put you up here in these hotels. Hey, we're going to go rent these hotels out, give these tax breaks to these hotels or something, to get people out of, the way of the hurricane. And that's the same thing with Florida. It almost looks like all of Florida could be devastated. That's a lot of people. A lot of people that live there.
The Florida storm, they've known that the wind storm, the wind speeds are going to be much more destructive. Harvey has been known that it was going to be rain. Like they knew that way ahead of the scale from all the simulations and stuff. So like the mayor of Houston basically said, we can't get all of these people on the road. They talked about it. It's impossible to get this many millions of people completely out of this city. And so they got people that were specifically in dangerous areas out. There was a whole bunch of I listened to a lot of it and found that some of the decisions they made, it's like one of those decisions where it's like, well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers decided, and it's like, well, do we flood 30,000 houses, or do we flood the entire of a major metropolitan area? And so like they had to make the decision to flood those houses. And now the U.S. Army of Engineers is being sued over that decision. Not so much that they made the wrong decision, but they decided to destroy all this stuff. So that's essentially a government taking a property, and the people need to be reimbursed for that kind of stuff. Like there's all kinds of gray area in this kind of stuff. And with the Florida situation, like we know way in advance that this is going to be way more destructive than we expect. And so this one, I definitely think that this is a mandatory evacuation, much more than the Harvey situation was. But even Harvey should have been better. But I mean, we'll see what happens.
And tonight we're not here to debate the government side of this or the other side of this. I mean, that's a very interesting perspective, Hannah. Like, I agree with you, and we could get into the political side of this, right? We could actually talk about that because that's important. That's actually very, very important. It's an extremely important thing that our government doesn't know how to react, and we don't have contingency plans, and that we're that worried about, who owes who money over this, when we should be more worried about let's save lives and we're going to pay these people back. Because, I mean, in all fairness, if I was in Houston and all of a sudden, I knew this was going to happen, all my stuff was going to be destroyed, and nobody wanted to cover it, and you could wipe my livelihood out by just a natural disaster, that's awful. That is an awful thing, and I shouldn't be punished just because I live in this city. Like, I would understand if, like, we built a city on a fault line or on top of a volcano. If, like, we built a platform over a volcano and said, we're building this large city here because the volcano's probably not going to erupt. But in all fairness, you're still building over top of a bloody volcano. Think about that. That's insanity. But that could happen.
Well, that's kind of like what's happening now if you think about it. So, like, now we're looking at weather as far as the current state of the area, whatever, the climate. And we're saying, well, it's kind of like if you build a house on the coast, it's kind of like building on a volcano. Now, why is that so much different than what it used to be? Like, why is it so much bigger of a deal, so much more dangerous than it used to be? And that's what we're talking about when it comes to whether or not this is climate change and these hurricanes, this series of intense hurricanes is, a result of climate change versus just a really bad uptick in the weather. And next year it'll be back to normal. Everybody's cheery and happy. It's like, what did you find, really? Because I have a few things that I've been finding, but I didn't go through the Atlantic thing that you talked about. Essentially, the article starts off just did a climate change intensify Hurricane Harvey?
Yeah, and they exactly, yes. And so even back in the day, like let's go back first to the Weather Channel article. I have a Weather Channel article that I linked in here that's from 2015 that talks about, is climate change altering hurricane seasons as you know it? Now, I don't want to say, we talk about the Weather Channel. We go, I seem to think they're pretty fair. They're just reporting weather. I mean, for Christ's sake, they don't have a biased agenda. They're not bought out by one of these other organizations. They're the Weather Channel.
George Soros isn't running the Weather Channel and paying them to protest in the streets.
Exactly. So they talk about a article that was published in National Climate Change by Florida State geography professor Jim Ellison and
Elsner
and Nam Young Kang, deputy of director of the National Typhoon Center in South Korea. And they talk about how the study finds that warmer ocean temperatures caused by climate change may be fueling stronger hurricanes. But, and here's this big but, at the same time, they're creating fewer storms. And he says, we're seeing fewer hurricanes, but the ones we do see are more intense. When one comes, all hell breaks loose. Now, if we were to go down this rabbit trail, right, with this climate change, if climate change is increasing, and they say, well, climate change increases, but we're not seeing an increase in hurricanes, therefore climate change is illogical and doesn't exist, you're cherry picking. Yeah, you're cherry picking this conversation, and that's the problem I've actually had on my Facebook page is that I post about this and people are like, well, you're not going far enough back. Well, what are you talking about? I gotta go farther back than 150 years? Oh yeah, you gotta go back thousands of years. Well, they didn't have the same equipment, the same technology we have today. You can't get the same data read.
Well, there's also an assumption being made there is that climate change should result in more hurricanes. Well, this is saying that climate change isn't resulting in more hurricanes; it's resulting in stronger ones. Well, you can't assume more hurricanes for climate change. Maybe we could assume, if you thought differently, there would be less hurricanes, but much more stronger ones. Like, why is that completely outside or different or any kind of invalidation of climate change itself?
Exactly. And, they talk about how the Earth's temperature has warmed 1.53 degrees between 1980 and 2012. They talk about how the sea surface temperature of the globe has raised 1.3 or 03 degrees in the 20th century. They talk about how the temperatures have continued to increase for 134 years. So yes, there's 6.1 fewer storms than would be expected, but the frequency or the intensity of these storms has gone so far past that meter. They're seeing an average of 3 miles per hour stronger winds than they had before or could even have expected in 1984. And that's just insane, right? They're seeing stronger hurricanes and stronger storm systems than they have in the past. And that's the thing about it, is it's saying, okay, so hold on, maybe originally climate change scientists said you're going to see more storms, right? Maybe they did say that. I'm not going to say they did or didn't. So maybe they did. And that's fair. If we're not seeing more storms, that doesn't prove that climate change doesn't happen. All it does is show that we were incorrect in interpreting the data and understanding what could happen from these storms and the data that we were seeing.
It's just one of the scenarios, one of the possible scenarios. Okay, if climate change is happening, it'll result in what? Either more catastrophic hurricanes, just regularly, just more of them, just an onslaught, or it would result in much, much stronger ones. And so maybe they need to be spaced out further because they'll have to build up in power or something like that. These are all possible situations that could be essentially strengthened by warmer water. So that's one of the things about the Hurricane Harvey, and where that brings it in. All the evidence that I've been hearing about that is that Hurricane Harvey was an oscillating storm. It went back and forth, in and out, and it was going out to warm water, gathering humidity, because think about it, if the ocean surface is warmer, it's going to evaporate more. It's just water evaporates more at just a little bit higher temperature. You can have more water easily accessible by these massive storms. And then the storm goes back onto land, dumps that water, becomes weaker, and it oscillates back and forth. And that's where we saw this massive, massive level of water come falling down. And they said that the human contribution, according to the Atlantic, said that it could be up to 30% or so of the total rainfall coming out of the storm. And that storm dropped 50 plus inches of rain. So 30% of that, we're talking, the difference between, what would that be? 50%. So, 30, what is that? 15 inches roughly of rain that could have been averted. I mean, how many houses could that have saved if we could have maybe gotten that under control? I mean, this is a large percent of what could have been. I mean, 15 inches could change the lives of tons of people if maybe we caught this a little bit earlier and tried to slow down this kind of rainfall. So, I mean, this is a big deal. And I think that the warmer waters and this kind of oscillation is an interesting tell as to how climate change causing a stronger storm, as opposed to climate change should cause 10 more Harveys as opposed to one really big, powerful one.
Yeah, and the Atlantic article talks, says this. It says we also suggest an explanation for one of Harvey's strangest and scariest behaviors. The storm intensifies upon, up until the moment of landfall, achieving Category 4 strength hours before it slammed into the Texas coast. This is not only rare for tropical cyclones in the western Gulf of Mexico, it may even be unique. In the last 30 years, no storms west of Florida have intensified in the last 12 hours before landfall. And they talk about why it is. If your average temperatures are rising and you're able to evaporate faster, and you're, like you just said, all these things are happening on a larger scale, it's going to create a more intense storm. And so, again, climate change doesn't have to dictate that we're going to have more storms. It could dictate that we're going to have fewer storms, but more devastating storms. And if our storms are more devastating, isn't that worse than having more of them? I mean, we could talk about it for a second, right? I like to talk about books, and I like it. I really like it. We're going to talk about that next week probably, because I can't help myself and go see the movie. But
have you seen it yet or no?
No. It came out tonight. I'm doing this with you tonight instead of.
Oh, I thought it was on Sunday.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, either way, so
it comes out on Thursday nights. It came out at 7:00 in Grand Rapids on Thursday night. And we're here recording. I'm here recording with you instead of going and seeing the movie I really like, because I like you and the audience better than I like the movie. But, if you talk about it, they talk about these cycles, right? And the difference is this supreme evil being, right? For the cycle and the rains and different things like that. But if we look at, the actual data behind this, we can actually see a cycle in the storms, right? And you can see the cycle continues to increase. So, whereas we started off with 3, 4, 5, 6 a year, we're now at 6, 7, 8, 9 a year, and then all of a sudden we drop off and we go down, and the storm frequency goes down, but the intensity goes up. So,
we had the Superstorm Sandy and Katrina. I mean, those were really big deals. The new one coming through right now, Irma, that's being compared to Andrew, which is the most expensive hurricane in the history of the United States. Since I believe that was 12 years ago. So, I mean, we're bringing on just this year alone an insane number. So that's where all these correlations are coming in. So many people are saying like, oh, climate change confirmed. And I would love to hear them say that, yes, these are really, really big storms. But also, here are some of the underlying reasons, as opposed to just the fact that there are more really big storms happening this year. Here's the reason why these storms are here. This storm is strong because of hot water. This storm is strong because of supercells forming in the water. Whatever scientific information is explaining this, they need to bring that too. Don't just share stuff that says we've had 2 really big ones. There's a 3rd one possibly coming. Therefore, climate change. Like, you need to have a better argument than that. And that's one of the things that I was gonna post something, gonna yell at some people that were sharing that, and I just like, whatever. Maybe we'll talk about it on the show. And that's kind of where I am with this. It's like, I love this stuff. I love these really deep, these really in-depth articles, and I do really think that we need to concentrate and make sure that we put all of the information out there so that we don't get our feet tangled up and someone says, actually, you know what, whatever, and so we have to retract because these storms aren't directly correlating, or it's just a correlation, not a causation to climate change.
Exactly, and as we close the show out, that's one of the big things here, is that we're not claiming climate change is a myth. We're not claiming climate change is this big, epic, conspiracy theory. We're not claiming that climate change knows everything. What we are doing is saying, hey, climate change is a thing, everyone. Let's be realistic about this. Let's actually look at what could happen, what is creating, what is causing, and go, hey, how can we fix this? Because we elected a president, I didn't, but other people elected a president that put some really awful people in charge of science development, and it's not their fault that we have hurricanes, but it is their fault if they don't do anything about trying to change the situation. And it doesn't mean that we need to say, oh, we're going to start putting up larger walls to stop the hurricanes from coming across. It means that we're going to try and fix where we're at in the climate change fight. And it's going to mean that we're not going to draw to the Paris Accord, and we're going to do all these stupid, idiotic things that create a very disingenuous, crazy outlook on climate change. It means we're going to embrace it. We're going to figure out how to reduce it and figure out where our biggest gains are as a nation to stop polluting the world. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night. We'll see you next week, Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern on Cellar Door Skeptics.
Listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, CellarDoorSkeptics.com.